Welcome to growthtofreedom.com, the show that brings you inspiration, transformation, and leadership. We're helping you connect the dots, see the blind spots, and get unstuck so you can go out and create more sales, more profits, more growth. More importantly, so you can have a bigger impact, have a bigger reach, and make a bigger contribution. Is that what you want? If that's not what you want, you might want to tune out. But if it is what you want, you are going to love today's session. Let me ask you this. What would it be worth for you if you could become microfamous? If you could go out there and have the ability in your niche, in your industry, to become the preeminent known expert and leader in your field, to dominate your field, right? To be able to attract new potential clients, to be able to develop relationships with your perfect clients, and as importantly, to be able to convert your perfect clients to grow your business. What would that be worth to you? What would it mean for you? Well, if that's something that would interest you, then you're going to love our guest expert today. His name is Matt Johnston, and Matt is the author of a book called Microfamous. He currently hosts the podcast Microfamous. He's a frequent podcast guest, event speaker to audiences all over the globe. He's an industry icon in many ways, and he also has a marketing agency. He's a founder. He's a musician. I mean, he's got such an amazing, diverse background. He's just a cool cat, is a great way to describe him. He helps business owners. He helps coaches, maybe like you, consultants and thought leaders use done-for-you podcasting to attract your perfect audience, build influence, and become what he calls micro-famous. And you're going to learn. So I'd encourage you, grab a pen, grab a piece of paper. If you're driving, do me a favor. Pull over right now. No, I'm kidding. Well, kind of. No, pull over. Seriously. Oh, by the way, if you want to come back to this episode, you can do that at growthtofreedom.com/313. That's growthtofreedom.com/313. If you never want to miss an episode, you can go to growthtofreedom.com/subscribe. That's growthtofreedom.com/subscribe. Matt, welcome to the show. How are you, brother?
I'm doing really well, Dan. How are you?
Doing great. Doing great. I want to dive right into it. I mean, you've had amazing success. You've got this concept called Microfamous. Before we get into the strategy side of it, can you think back to some of your big business mistakes, or maybe the big business failure that maybe was a catalyst that's led you to where you are today, and share that and what you learned from it, that our viewers and our listeners can learn from it too?
Well, it's funny, the timing of it, because I would say my biggest mistake in business was saying yes too much, and found myself not only running an agency, but I was a partner in 4 other ventures. Woo. With equity stakes and obligations and the whole 9 yards. What's funny is before you and I jumped on, I was on a call with a guy that at one point was my business partner, and now we run operations that technically compete with each other, and we still get together and just have fun, talk about the industry, share ideas and stuff. And so I what's funny is I made the same mistake in music. Right. So at one point, when I was chasing the dream as a musician, I was in 4 different bands. So then I promptly got into business and made the same mistake there too. So the idea was when I got microfamous, so to speak, in the real estate space, the residential real estate coaching world, I loved those guys, and they were all my friends, and I love talking. I can talk about group coaching structure randomly, just stuff like that for hours at a time. And so I had a lot of opportunities come my way to get involved in, new coaching consulting companies and, all these different projects. And I said yes too much. So there was a time when I walked away from a meeting one time, and I was the only one basically that had a whole bunch of stuff added on my to-do list. And I'm like, there's no way I'm going to get any of this stuff done. And I feel like I'm pushing 5 different rocks up 5 different hills. And I decided to get out of all of it. So I focused just on the agency. I got out of everything where it was a partial ownership structure, gave up all my equity, the whole 9 yards. I did everything I could to just cut it back to doing one thing. And even within the agency, we really just sell one thing to one kind of person. So I radically simplified, and I'm much, much happier. And today I run the operations of the agency in 3 or 4 hours a week. The rest of the time is mine to invest in the business how I choose, in marketing and sales and things like that. And that wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have made that decision to really radically simplify.
And as you're listening or you're watching right now, like what could you learn by saying no more often than yes, right? And simplifying what it is you're doing to focus on that one main thing. How would it shift your business? How would it shift your personal life? How would it give you back more time or pay you forward more time or give you more freedom or get you out of the things that keep you stuck? Like, what would it mean for you? Now, Matt, as you've been on this, journey, and now you've really, categorized in this Microfamous model that you've implemented and built. Like, why are you doing this side of it? Like, why did you decide this to be the one thing with helping people become microfamous using, media, podcasting, etc.?
Well, I think it fits probably both of our mentalities and even just the overall focus of both of our podcasts really well, because it was two things. It was the fact that I had 100% ownership gave me the highest potential for freedom. And when I did the whole, kind of values breakdown, freedom came out number one, right? So freedom is my number one value. The other part of it was the contribution side, which is, like I could have started different types of agencies or served a different type of client, but I didn't want to end up 10 years down the line of running my business and make a lot of money and then go, okay, now it's time to make a contribution. Because I saw that a lot with even some of my friends and clients, and I wanted to build the contribution like into the business. And so I decided, well, look, like the coaches and the consultants and thought leaders, set aside the fact that those are my friends and the people I enjoy spending time with, they're also the people that have like earth-changing content. So I felt like if I was going to do something like, hey, let's build contribution into the structure of the business and let's focus on the one thing where even if I never became, Tony Robbins famous, I can help a whole bunch of other people become micro-famous, and their content is going to change a whole lot of people's lives. And that would be extremely fulfilling. That 10 years from now, I'll look back on the business and the business will be fulfilling and contributing, rather than then deciding at that point, oh, now it's time to do something that makes a contribution.
Now speak to like your thinking process of like how you came to this, conclusion, right? Because here's, I don't know if you see this with a lot of your clients. We've seen this with, the tens of thousands of clients we've worked with over the years, coming up on 31 years now. Is that most people, including myself in my early days of building a business, a core value being growth, right? And then on top of it, it became the whatever it takes mentality. And there's certain experts that still teach this. You can sleep when you're dead, and it's all about hustle, right? To get ahead, right? And, if I had to describe my early years model, first view of my business, it was more like growth to stress. To get theory of success, right? That would have been the model, like growth to stress leads to success. And that's one of the reasons our show is called Growth to Freedom, right? And also one of the main core values, not only personally, but in our business, is contribution. Yeah. So I'm curious of your thinking. It's probably, not something, maybe you've consciously thought about, maybe you have. Like, talk about your thinking of how you decided to strategically design the way you just described it with the focus on, growth as a core value, freedom as a core value, and contribution.
So there's a couple of things that really contributed. The first thing is that I'm like the least likely person to ever become an entrepreneur. And you and I have talked about this a little bit behind the scenes. I'm a pastor's kid. I was homeschooled, and I grew up watching my dad pastor a church with essentially no staff, very little counseling. Like he led the church from the pulpit. In other words, he led through the content that he put out. And because the content was so good of what he was preaching, like that changed people's lives. So that was kind of my model growing up. And when I got into the agency world, I guess that was kind of in my background, and I wanted to carry something like that forward. And then the other part of it was the agency that I came out of, the founder of that agency built this amazing systematic agency with a package service that sold one thing to one person, and I watched the freedom that it generated in his life. So that I wanted to combine those two approaches of like helping amazing people put out really great life-changing content into the world. Like I knew that would give me the fulfillment that I wanted. On the business structure side of things, I had that model of looking at someone that had built something extremely systematic, very packaged, one thing to one person, and I saw behind the scenes how that freed up his personal life and kind of broke that cycle that you mentioned, that hustle to stress to try to prove something to other people kind of cycle. And so it was really, I think it was just a combination of those two models in my life over the years, coalescing into figuring out, well, how do I just put that into a business structure? That's probably the best answer to that.
And you built, this business structure, right? Mm-hmm. And you've coined essentially or trademarked the idea of this Microfamous methodology, right? Mm-hmm. Like what are, not only yourself, you do this for and with, but also, the numerous clients and all types of amazing industries that you work with, Matt. Like what are like 1 to 3 strategies as you think about it that right now, like if you were going to give our viewers, our listener, maybe even your clients advice, here's the 1 to 3 strategies for you to get in place right away to help you get on this path to Microfamous.
So the first one is really getting clear on who the right people are. So the way that I would define Microfamous is that it's a state of being famously influential to exactly the right people. And I think this is what trips up a lot of people. I was doing like a live podcast interview, and it's being broadcast into a LinkedIn group. And so they had people like on the Zoom call with us. And I was talking about Gary Vee and the whole kind of Gary Vee, Grant Cardone approach that you mentioned, just the hustle mentality. And I pointed out that Gary Vee, like the first video on YouTube of this year was how to get the maximum number of eyeballs on your content in 2021. And I mentioned that is how that actually trips up a lot of people in our space, the coaching consulting space, because we end up creating content to get the maximum number of eyeballs and not the right eyeballs, right? We don't actually pick who the right people are. And a guy happened to be on the Zoom call is like, oh my God, you're so right. I used to work for Gary Vee. And every single meeting we had started with that question of how do we get the maximum number of eyeballs on our content? And what it ends up leading, like a lot of coaches and consultants to, is this approach of try to create content that gets the maximum number of eyeballs, explore every new social media option that comes along, and do whatever it takes to get attention, which right now on social media means real-time content creation and real-time engagement, like those two things. Like the big social companies have decided that if they're going to promote anything, it's going to be people spending hours on a day on their device creating content and engaging with the audience in real time. And there's nothing wrong with that. So that approach works. But if you're a coach or consultant on the introverted side like I am, that sounds exhausting. And like that's where I really have a heart for people, because I run into coaches and consultants and thought leaders and stuff that have amazing, amazing life-changing content, but they're looking at that Gary Vee, Grant Cardone approach and just going, it obviously works, so what's wrong with me? Why am I not able to do that? Why am I not able to be active enough on social media to really cut through the noise? And like the whole point of Microfamous and my approach that I built for myself and that I try to implement with clients is that there is nothing wrong with you. Like that approach works, but it works for the right person. And if you're not that person, you have to find a different approach. So hopefully that's kind of the main thing I hope to convey over the next couple of years of kind of talking about Microfamous, is speaking really directly to the people that are either on the introverted side or they would consider themselves like introverts on social media, and just tell like, hey, there's nothing wrong with you. There's other things you can do to get the same results. And Dan, you and I both help clients do this with our own like marketing systems. But if you have the right marketing system, you don't need to change. Like our clients don't need to spend their time changing their behavior and their personality. They just need a better system around them.
Yeah. And speaking of a better system, it is you're listening or watching right now, kind of tying in with what Matt shared. Here's a thought for you. Like, regardless of the person, maybe you are that hustle. Like in my 20s, 30s, even early 40s, I bought into that whole idea of hustle, outwork everybody, right? And do more than everybody, and put the extra hours in, right? We've all heard that philosophy, right? Or you can work smarter. And what I mean by that, like, for example, there are certain experts that say, post 60, 70 times a day and be on for hours and hours and hours and engage with your audience. Or you can just create one piece of micro content built around like what Matt's talking about, this micro-famous idea, target the exact right people, like down to age, male, female, demographics, psychographics, behaviors, interests, exclusions of things that they are not interested in.
Yeah.
And then put $1 a day to it. $5 a day, $10 a day behind it. You post one piece of content, ripple the impact. So one piece of content versus 70. And I would bet dollars to donuts if you do this just once a week, whether it's a podcast or it's a piece of micro content or otherwise, and there are many ways to do this, that in 6 months to a year, you'd be 10 times further ahead, and you would have done it with a 1/10 of the energy and probably more, 1/70th of the energy of some of the experts teaching you to post 60 to 70 posts a day and be on there for hours and hours. You choose, right? But again, it's up to you to choose what.
Well, yeah. And that's the thing is they both work. They both work, but they don't work for everyone equally. Yeah,
that's right.
And if you're finding that you've been that person, and like you said, like Dan, you've been that person at one point in your life, but that doesn't last forever. So you may be in a stage of your business where you love to hustle, and like I've got a client who, like we started this podcast, and he was like 6 months in, and then he had his first kid. It's like, I want to spend time with my kids. So it's like, all right, well, we'll put the podcast on hold for a while. We'll come back with season 2. Great. No big deal. Like that's life. One of my other clients has just to kind of set the vision of what like Microfamous actually looks like in real life. Imagine being in a space where you're running a group coaching program and you do some live events, which Dan, that's a ton of our clients. But imagine that the entire universe of people who need your coaching and can afford to pay for it is only like 10 to 12,000 people in any given year. But imagine that you run the podcast that gets 10,000 downloads a month in that space. You're sitting pretty. And that's one of my clients that in the real estate space. He's like in one particular niche of the real estate space. And so I think when we buy into that idea that the only definition of success is maximum number of eyeballs, and we create content that's geared to that, we're actually, the problem isn't just that it burns us out and stuff like that. It's that, in my opinion, it ends up leading us away from an idea that's so clear and compelling to the right people that they immediately turn around and want to write us a check for something. Like I remember watching that client go from, like, when we first started working together, he was offering like these in-person boot camps where people would come into his office in Omaha and just like look at how he ran his real estate team, because he nets 7 figures off of his real estate team and runs it in like 2 hours a week, right? So they would pay $2,000. They'd have to have lots of conversations, lots of back and forth on social media, and then he'd send them a PayPal invoice. They'd show up. There's tons of communication, tons of selling. To flash forward like a year and a half after podcasting, and he would have people go listen to a few podcast episodes, go to his website, register. He raised the price by $1,000, so now it's a $3,000 workshop. They come in, they pay for it on the website, don't talk to anybody, get on a plane, and show up to his office in Omaha, never having talked to anyone. And they just walk into his office and he meets them for the first time. Like that, to me, like that, I would much rather have that level of influence than to get thousands of random eyeballs on one of my Instagram posts and then nobody buys from me. And I think that's the big lie, is we think that that's what it takes. But I know too many people who have too big of an audience and can't get anybody to buy. And then I know people like that I mentioned that you would never know who they are, and they make 6-7 figures a year off their coaching consulting business. I'd rather do that.
And as you're watching or listening, would you rather do that? Right? Quality over quantity. Yeah. And what if you could do both, right? Mm-hmm. You could get to the right fit quantity, kind of what Matt mentioned. You don't have to sacrifice one to the other, but like, are you possibly making the mistake, that little nuance that Matt shared earlier, focusing on what's the maximum amount of eyeballs instead of the right eyeballs with your behaviors, your interests, demographics, psychographics? I'll tell you from experience, like Matt shared, it pays dividends. He's given you a great example of, one of his real estate clients, of many clients he works with, where this strategy works. It can work for you. Matt, beyond the idea of maybe the wrong focus of maximum eyeballs versus the right eyeballs. What's another common mistake that you see most people making as they're trying to become, micro famous?
Well, I think it's really, it's tough for people to really come to a decision of what they want to be known for and stick with it for any length of time to where they actually break through into the market. You know what I'm saying? Like when I first came across you and I saw those 3 words, direct response branding, I'm like, genius, freaking God. I was actually like semi upset because I'm like, damn, why didn't I think of that? It was like in an instant, because I know the industry, and I'm like, oh man, it's like the perfect combination of big company and Dan Kennedy, J. Abraham. Like I just instinctively knew exactly what it was. I loved it. I'm like, oh, I'm so wildly jealous that he thought of that before I did. But I know that there are parts of you that are not encapsulated in those 3 words. So it's like if you went down in your business history and that's all that you were known for, are you okay with that? And hopefully in your case the answer is yes, because it would be an amazing legacy to leave, is to become known as the direct response branding guy. But think about someone like a John Maxwell who's known for leadership. Like if his next book comes out tomorrow, I guarantee you it's about leadership. Like I don't even have to look at the title. It's probably about leadership. But He's a smart guy. He could write about a whole bunch of other stuff. The problem is if he did, he would lose that high ground, that positioning of being the guy on leadership. And it's tough, man. It's tough for coaches and consultants. Like you can break through the noise, you can cut through it, but you do have to make that decision, not only who the right people are for you, but what's that one thing you want to become known for? Because if you decide that, it makes everything a lot easier, but you have to leave a part of your identity out of the public eye. You have to leave it for the people that are close to you in your inner circle where they can appreciate you for the full spectrum of who you are. And so like the more that I talk about like Microfamous and just the ideas of like, people like the idea of cutting through the noise. They love the idea of being well known. The problem is they want to be known for like who they are as a complete human being. It's like, that's not how it works. Like people need to be known for one thing and you have to be okay with that. And you have to leave those other pieces of yourself kind of out of the public limelight and be okay being one thing. Like I have come to the conclusion I'm okay being the Microfamous guy. The fact that I'm a musician and play 5 instruments, that's for a different crowd, and I have to be okay with, like, I'm not trying to blend those 2 brands together. I don't try to incorporate music into my business, like none of that. That has to be a completely separate thing. If I want to get known for music, it has to be to a completely separate audience with a completely separate brand name. And I think there's a ton of people twisting themselves into pretzels trying to figure out how to tie all these different threads of their identity together into one brand, and then they wonder why it doesn't work in the market. It's like that's not how your audience thinks. They want to put you at the top of a bucket that's easy for them to understand. If you refuse to make it easy for them to understand, they will not remember you.
And speaking of that, Microfamous, right? I think you've kind of summarized components of it, and it probably is evident, as you've shared, throughout the session and our interview so far. But give us a definition of what is Microfamous.
I would say if you're a coach consultant, can you run a 7-figure business with an audience of around 10,000 people? And I would say in most cases you can't, unless you're offering something that's just below $1,000. The economics just don't work. And that's not most of the people that you and I hang out with. Right. Most of our people charge $3, $4, $5,000, 10 to 40 grand for their individual one-on-one group or coaching or whatever. Man, if you're charging those kind of prices, you don't need 100,000 followers on Instagram. You just need to be famously influential to the right group of 10,000 people. I would argue if you have the right 5,000 friends on Facebook, you may be able to run a 7-figure, profitable, sustainable business if they're the right 5,000 people. You may just be able to max out your friend limit on your personal profile and not even bother with anything else. You may have an email list of 10,000 people and not be on social media at all. That's kind of the direction I'm moving, is podcasting and email, going old school. That just in case I get deplatformed for saying something on Facebook. We live in strange times. So yeah, it's, to me, a good example of Microfamous is, can you run a 7-figure business off of an audience of 10,000 people? And I would argue you absolutely can. And so why not make that the goal? Now, that doesn't restrict your choices later on, but let's start there rather than trying to get famous to everybody and dilute your message to the point where it doesn't cut through. I would argue find who the right 10,000 people are. That way you can build a message that cuts through, max out those 10,000 people, then decide if you want to get, Tony Robbins famous from there. But don't skip that first audience of 10,000 people. Like, they need you to speak something to them that resonates deeply. Otherwise, you won't cut through the noise and you won't even get to 10,000.
And as you're watching or listening right now, like, how valuable would it be for you to get to the right 10 to 12,000, right? Here's a damaging confession. I don't know that I've ever shared this before, but when I had one of my businesses was a media business, we had built this Matt up to, about 2.5 million subscribers.
Wow.
I had segments of lists that were in a range of between 5 and 10,000 that we made far more impact and far more money from than that list of over 2.5 million. Right? So it's not the eyeballs total. It's not the maximum eyeballs. It's the right eyeballs. I don't think we can stress that enough as you're watching or listening right now. Now, Matt, I mean, you've scratched the surface on Microfamous, all kinds of, implementation strategies someone can put in place today. If people want to connect with you, if they want to reach you, if they want to, you have all kinds of resources. Where can people reach out to you, connect with you, learn more about what you have to offer with Microfamous or otherwise?
Well, central place is easy. That's getmicrofamous.com. The book is on Amazon, and then podcast on obviously your favorite players. It's Microfamous, easy to find. That's probably the best way to go. I'd love for people to listen to the podcast because that's where I really dig into the concepts and the strategy. So we don't have a lot of guests. It's mainly just me really digging into the ideas, the belief systems, and what it takes to become microfamous and create ideal clients over time, which I think is what most of us want. Like, if you want freedom, you don't just want people that are willing to cut you a check. You want people that you actually want in your life. And Microfamous to me is kind of one of the paths to get there. And if you're on the introverted side especially, and social media does not appeal to you, that's not what you enjoy doing. It's like you got to figure out something else to do. And Microfamous is a very different approach to getting what you want without the Gary Vee route.
So I encourage you, go to getmicrofamous.com. That's getmicrofamous.com. Check out the podcast, check out the resources, get his book, read it. Like, it will save you time. It'll save you money. And if you're looking for a way where instead of the hustle approach or posting 60, 70 posts like some experts are teaching out there, well, like, what would it be worth if you could use micro content to become microfamous in half the time, or a tenth the time, or even 1/60th of the time, comparatively on a daily basis? What would that be worth to you as far as freedom to get out of the day-to-day of maybe what you're doing, or wearing too many hats, or spinning too many plates and feeling exhausted or overwhelmed or burnt out as a result, right? Because of what so many experts are teaching you. It's not your fault, right? There are all kinds of paths. There's not one way to do any of this. But if you're looking for maybe a way to work smarter, to work, get more results in less time, then I encourage you, go to getmicrofamous.com, getmicrofamous.com, check out the podcast, get the resources, get the book, and go from there. As we wrap this up, Matt, what's a question I should have asked you that we didn't get a chance to cover yet?
Oh man.
Because there's so much. Like, you've got just a wealth of wisdom. So what is something I should have asked that we didn't just get a chance to cover yet?
A good question is like, what's the next step? What's the first thing that you do? I would say for most coaches and consultants, just reach out to the people that are in your network already that are hosting podcasts and ask if you can go be a guest. Give value. Start to refine your message and watch to see what those podcast hosts and their audiences respond to. That's one of the best ways to see if you actually have a clear and compelling idea that gets attention from the right people, is just to go get featured on podcasts as a guest expert and see what happens. See how the podcast host responds, see how the audience responds. And I promise you, if you're if you're in the coaching consulting world, you already know people in your network that are hosting those shows. All you need to do is reach out, ask if you can be a guest, and do a few of those and just see what the response is from the audience. And that will tell you if you actually truly do have a clear and compelling idea.
And I'm curious, who's been a mentor or a favorite coach that you've learned from, work with, recent, past, what have you, that has impacted you?
I'll give you a fun one. I don't talk about him a ton, but I love him to death. Chris Lochhead. So he's the author of Play Bigger and Niche Down, and he hosts he's got a couple of podcasts actually. He's got a really good one called Lochhead on Marketing, and yeah, he was a big influence on me.
That's amazing.
Play Bigger is one of the best marketing books since Crossing the Chasm. It's phenomenal. So anybody, like if you don't read my book, hell, go read Play Bigger. Part of the reason I wrote Microfamous is because people have trouble relating the concepts that he talks about in the big Silicon Valley world to this wild west of entrepreneurialism, but it's all the same thing. People's brains they work the same way. The marketing challenge is the same. It's to become known for one thing. He was doing it at the Silicon Valley level, and his last company he worked at sold to HP for $4.5 billion. So the examples that he gives in the book are amazing, but people go, well, how does that apply to me? So I came along with a book like Microfamous partly to help people bridge that gap. But yeah, the principles in that book where he talks about 70, like whoever's the category leader captures 76% of the economics of a space, fucking phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal.
So go check that out. And by the way, when you come back to this episode at growthtofreedom.com/313, that's growthtofreedom.com/313. The notes, the resources, the links to Play Bigger, to Niche Down, to Chris Lochhead, and his information will also be in the show notes. You can come back to growthtofreedom.com/313. What are 1 to 3 action steps, Matt, that you hope that our viewers, our listeners take from our time today?
I don't know if we have time for 3. I'll give you one. So one weird thing that's worked for me lately, black Post-it notes. So I took the things that I wanted to accomplish in a given week, such as the number of cheat meals that I'm limited to, the number of workouts I want to do, and the number of sessions that I want to spend on music as a passion side project thing. I have it all kind of written out in black Post-it notes up on my wall right there. So whenever I walk by that wall, I see where I'm at in terms of how many cheat meals do I have left this week, how many workouts have I done, how many music sessions have I done. So I walk past that thing 1,000 times a day, and I'm constantly seeing my progress towards my goals and where I'm at. So yeah, that would be my one suggestion, is to put whatever it is for you. If it's black Post-it notes, that's fine, but find a way to put your the practical action steps that you're tracking, put it in front of your face as opposed to just living on an app or something on your computer, because it will seep into your subconscious.
Totally agree, man. Like I got a wall full of that right here.
Really?
Giant white wall with my Post-it notes, and I handwrite stuff. I don't enter most things in, a machine.
Yeah.
Because they've proven that certain things, by writing it down and also visually being able to see it, makes a big impact, makes a big difference. So he's Matt Johnson. I encourage you again, go get microfamous.com, getmicrofamous.com, check out his podcast, get his book. You'll love his resources. I mean, you can see he's just, a genuine guy who helps business owners, coaches, consultants, maybe like you, take micro content and help you become micro famous. Why? So you can get more clients, right? So you can have a bigger impact, have a bigger reach, and make a bigger contribution. So I encourage you, take action with what Matt has shared with you today, right? One, the Post-it notes, whether they're black or what have you, but get them in front of you. It's amazing what it'll do in your accountability and your momentum and clarity and direction and a whole lot more. On top of that, I mean, I've got multiple pages of notes here, focusing on the one thing. He shared the story of several stories, but one of the stories he talked about how, he had 4 other businesses that he was involved in as an equity partner, and he let him go to focus on the one main thing, his sweet spot, right? He had the same thing going on in his band business. Like, history has a way of, for you, as you're watching or listening, what are some of these hidden blocks that might be getting in the way, that if you narrow down to the one main thing, would transform your life to give you more freedom, give you the ability to have a bigger impact, a greater reach, and a bigger contribution, and a whole lot more. If you want to come back to this episode, you can do that at growthtofreedom.com/313. That's growthtofreedom.com/313. You never want to miss an episode. Go to growthtofreedom.com/subscribe. That's growthtofreedom.com/subscribe. Seize the day. Make it a great week. We'll see you next time on growthtofreedom.com. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to this episode of growthtofreedom.com. Are you struggling to get a steady flow of new clients every day, or maybe hit a plateau or hit a wall in growing your business? Well, let's help you solve this problem today. Let's review your business and have a conversation. You can do that for free today at breakthroughstrategycall.com. That's breakthroughstrategycall.com. In addition, if you're looking for a simple way to implement some of what we've been talking about in today's episode, then I want to encourage you to get our free small business toolkit. You can get that at activate.breakthrough3x.com. That's activate.breakthrough3x.com. If you'd like access to the special resources and all the show notes for this special episode, make sure to visit growthtofreedom.com.